All right, well, welcome everybody. Let me go to full screen just to change the look up a bit. I guess we're just gonna get, all I'm seeing is, we'll go back to the gallery so we look like the Brady Bunch. Okay, so anyway, I've got the latest solar news. Okay, so California Public Utilities Commission announced that they're gonna come out with their net metering 3.0 ruling by September 29th. So we'll see how that works out. To give you a little bit of background on that, every time they reach a 5% penetration of solar within California, their law says that they have to go back and reevaluate how they're going to be compensating people for solar. So now they're past the 10% penetration, so they're going to net metering 3.0. Last year, they announced that they were going to change things to where they're going to charge $8 per kilowatt of installed solar. So that was going to be the monthly access fee. So if the average size of an array in California is 8 kilowatts, that would be a $64 a month access fee at minimum. You have a larger system, it's even more. Then they also announced they're changing the net metering compensation rules. Currently, it's a retail to retail, which ends up averaging in California between 22 cents and 36 cents a kilowatt hour. They're changing it to essentially be 5 to 6 cents. So it's a huge impact for solar. So as soon as they announced this in December, there were lots of protests and politicians got involved. And then the PUC said, all right, we're going to reevaluate it. And now they're going to come out with whatever they come out with. Nobody has any projections on that. Who knows? So we'll see how that is. That be in a month.
Jay, are the old people grandfather? Are the old people who had solar before grandfathered in with their rates, or are they?
I think they are, but I think it's only for a limited time. It's not like a forever and ever thing. I think there's an end to that grandfathering, like 15-year period from the time they signed up to the time their grandfathering ends. REC Silicon just signed another agreement. They're the largest producer of domestic silicon. They signed it with a company called Mississippi Silicon. Apparently, this Mississippi mine is the first silicon mine that's opened in the United States in 40 years. They do already get supplied from a place in Washington State, also in Montana. When we look at where silicon comes from, this is part of a move to try and get everything domestically sourced as much as possible. That's the big get on the bandwagon thing at the moment. I'm sure we'll go to, global economy soon enough, as soon as somebody forgets how hard supply chain issues are. But anyway, China currently accounts for about 64% of all of the silicon produced in the world, followed by Russia. So that's 8%. And third place, Norway at about 6%. And then the United States, fourth place at about 4%. Solar Edge just announced that they're coming out with a complete system package for their DC coupled system. And so they're going to be marketing this as a package. And I think I may have mentioned before, I think that's going to be a continued trend where we see single manufactured package systems just for compatibility issues. It makes everybody feel warm and fuzzy about that. This will have their string inverter. It'll also have the optimizers. It has a integrated battery, Solar Edge battery. When I looked at all of the Solar Edge specs on that, looks an awful lot like the LG Chem Resu 10, which is the one that has been recommended with Solar Edge systems for a long time. I think they're just sticking their label on LG Chem and calling it Solar Edge, but may be wrong. And then they're going to have they're calling it a backup interface, which is weird. It's basically an auto transformer to disconnect you from the grid in case of a power outage. It's probably got some other smart things in it, but then they're also integrating in load management devices and EV charging station with all of this that's supposed to be integrated. I think their EV charging, that was a big deal. They wanted to hook that into their inverter directly, which that's fine as far as I'm concerned. But unless it has bi-directional charging, discharging, I don't see any advantage to it other than now you got to connect your charger near where your inverter is, which tends to be limiting, I think. I mean, Tony, you might have something to add on that. I don't know if you have any special knowledge about Solar Edge. That's maybe lower down the food chain than what you're involved in.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing kind of across the board on the technology front is that these things make sense to integrate. Now, what that looks like, I think is up to dealer's choice, right? On one hand, I remember last year, SunPower and Wallbox announced, two multi-billion-dollar companies announced this joint collaboration to more seamlessly integrate solar storage and EV charging. And what that ended up looking like was just they're going to sell power when they do a residential solar. One part of this is like a packaging perspective, and then another part of this is integration into products. And I think obviously that's something that I think is what matters, right? I think it's just another validation that these things in some cases make sense to all combine. And that wasn't the reality, even as recently as 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, of course, now as we're integrating more and more products together, there is that concern about compatibility. People get confused, and whether it's a problem or not, it's a complexity issue. And so if it all has the same brand, you can kind of be assured that it's going to be compatible. So I think you're right.
Announced, well, I think last year Enphase just Clipper Creek chargers.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know if
I
you
remember
guys
reading
can hear me, but my internet seems to be a little bit unstable here. So if I have to switch over to my hotspot, I just turned that on. So we'll see. Hopefully it'll clear itself out. Okay, so another thing that we're seeing with microinverters, which is interesting, AP Systems just announced their 4-panel microinverter. And I think this is kind of an interesting trend. One of the advantages of microinverters, of course, was individual, monitoring, individual MPPT tracking, things like that. Well, Generac is marketing essentially a 2-panel thing. That's their go-to. AP Systems now a 4-panel thing. So microinverter. So they're looking at lowering costs there. I'm not 100% certain. I've looked, but I haven't found an answer whether these are individually MPPT controlled within these microinverters and individually monitored, and the data supplied from the individual panels are separated. If that's the case, then this seems like a really good thing. If it's not the case, well, then you may get some loss because essentially it becomes a really tiny string inverter when you start doing four panels to a microinverter. So I don't know. Anybody know anything about that MPPT controlling on the multiple panel charge controllers or microinverters? Nope. Okay. Bill?
By chance, before I move forward, does Enphase comes out at 230 volts?
250 volt or the Enphase that I'm familiar with is there's the single phase 240 and the 3-phase 208. I mean, it'll go between those two. I'm not aware if they've got a European version or not for single phase. I guess I would assume they would, but I don't know. I don't know that for sure.
A dual Enphase 80, which was probably the combination of their 190 inverters, and they dropped it fairly quickly. It has the disadvantages of not being able to track.
Okay, I'm having some stability issues here.
Not your inverters kind of leaves you kind of up in the air as to which of the four is having trouble. And if one goes bad, do you junk the whole box and buy another four inverter combo? I don't know what the advantage is.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the advantage, of course, is that you just, you're only buying one piece for every 4 panels versus, but the price is up there. So, I guess it's a pay me now, pay me later kind of thing, I don't know, that's their shtick. I mean, it seems to be working in that when we get to the report later, they are eating into Enphase market share. So I think that seems to be working from their perspective. CE just announced they're going for a 50 gigawatt production of solar panels by 2027 domestically. This again follows along that trend of domestic production. To give you perspective there, that currently the US has about 5 gigawatts of manufacturing capacity. So they want 10 times the current capacity for production of solar panels domestic within 5 years. Most of that is being driven by the Inflation Reduction Act, which just was recently passed, where there is additional incentives if you're using domestically manufactured product. So I think we'll see a lot of people moving their production facilities, or at least their assembly facilities here to the US in order to meet the, get the better tax credit. And FERC just came out with a report that I found very interesting. They're projecting that over the next 3 years, renewable energy will grow at about 20 times the rate of natural gas. So that is very, very dramatic as far, this is for energy or for electricity production. I don't know about chemical production or anything like that.
Is natural gas going to grow at all?
A little bit,
I mean,
but not much.
Okay. I mean, I think that's the key, isn't it? If natural gas only grows 0.25%, then it's only 5%.
Yeah, we just need to start a few more wars, and then
Yeah.
then that'll help. That'll help.
Very true.
Pump the solar numbers.
Yeah, well, what we're really seeing is that like this year, 2022, first half of this year, renewable energy, wind and solar accounted for about 2/3 of all of the new electric generation capacity. Natural gas accounted for about 1/3. And that's, pretty good, but not really super unusual in recent years anyway. But what they're seeing, because they're looking at what's in the pipeline as far as permitting, that over the next 3 years, natural gas is just going to fall off a cliff. In fact, they're looking that there will not be as much installed in the next 3 years of natural gas as was installed the first half of this year. So renewables will continue to grow at a decent rate, but not more than I guess 10% or something like that. But natural gas is just going to fall off a cliff. And at the moment, coal and nuclear just they're dead as far as new capacity. They still represent a significant amount of installed capacity that's continuing to generate. But and in fact, they were showing that they think about 30% of all the electricity will in about 5 years be generated from renewables.
Okay. Jay, I'm curious, if they have the natural gas that they have now, is it that they've got their base load now, they can start adding on the kind of the variable renewal stuff? Is that what's driving the dying off of the natural gas?
No, I think natural gas, my guess is they're looking at, natural gas has traditionally been peaker plant. That's been the thing that they've looked at for variable loads, where they've traditionally looked at nuclear and coal as your base loads.
Mhm.
And then natural gas was, for peaker
Right.
plants. Now renewable comes into the mix, and that changes things a fair bit. And I think they have to come up with a way of making wind and solar their base load.
Mhm.
So my guess is the reason natural gas is falling off is the tax credit for battery storage.
Mhm.
Suddenly battery storage at the utility scale became 30% cheaper. And,
Mhm.
now it makes economic sense compared to natural gas. So
Okay.
if you're out there as a utility developer, why build a peaker plant when you can just simply store renewable energy
Mhm.
and use that to handle variable loads?
And
So
is just curious, do you know what kind of battery technologies is in the favor now? Is it just lithium ion, but like hundreds of them, or is it like the big utility scale metal,
yeah, I think it's lithium ion is what I'm seeing
Mhm.
being built. There's a lot of talk about flow batteries
Yeah.
or liquid metal batteries, especially at the
Yep.
utility scale, but they just seem to be hauling in trailer loads full of lithium ion
Okay.
batteries. And maybe we keep hearing that that's a bridge technology, that lithium ion is a bridge technology, but I'm
Mhm.
not seeing the other side of the bridge yet. I just, I don't
Yeah.
know. Somebody's going to come up with something. I think Tony's going to invent something where it's all made out of paper pulp or something. And that's what's going to power the future. Right.
Plants, all living plants.
Yeah, well, they have that. I mean, there is living
Yeah.
algae grown and things like that. And of course, saltwater battery is a technology that's very, very promising. But again, it's hard for these new technologies to get a foothold when lithium continues to fall in price the way it's been falling in price.
Mhm.
And so, it's always not a question of can you do something, but can you do it cost effectively compared to the alternatives? And I think Tony's pointed out in past meetings, there's a big profit margin out there in lithium ion batteries that's currently
Mhm.
being captured, because actually when we get into the Energy Sage report, all of the wholesale prices on lithium seem to be below $100 a kilowatt hour, but the retail prices are out there at around $1,300 per kilowatt hour, and that's a margin. I don't care in anybody's book. So they're probably not too eager to get out of that technology. So that's the news. Anybody have anything to add to that, what we just discussed, or comment on any of the news or technology trends, or add anything there?
Well, I think maybe an ad that was kind of a big deal in the circles that I run in was Tesla's virtual power plant. So another way of kind of thinking about all of this craziness is what happens if you can intelligently manage hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of individual energy storage solutions that are in homes or in businesses or on the grid, and get them to behave in such a way where you can do energy arbitrage, which is really just a fancy way of saying, sell energy back to the grid when it's, most advantageous to do so, and then recharge when it's most advantageous for you to do so. And so that's another element of this that, me and my guys have been working on pretty recently, which is, there's like the meat and potatoes of, here's some stuff and here's how much it costs and here are the margins and things like that. But taking it kind of one level deeper to think about how all of these systems can be pulled together to achieve kind of a huge difference, a huge dollar amount, and that's what Tesla's demonstrating with this virtual power plant play. And then I think the third level of that, and I'm here to tell you, nobody has this figured out, is the whole vehicle to X, right? Like everyone screams about bidirectionality for electric vehicles and being able to pull it from a vehicle and push it somewhere. But nobody really knows what that looks like or what that means, and what the real value proposition is. You know, if you're producing solar on site or in your house and your vehicle is not there, well, then it's kind of, you're just kind of a normal net metered situation where you're dumping it back to the grid and getting a credit for that. You know, when to pull energy from your car and push it somewhere, and when to charge is, I think, kind of another thing that's on the bleeding edge of this energy transition that we're in, and people are just trying to figure it out.
Mhm. Yeah, I think also, if you add into that, the whole concept of load management issues, not only at the utility scale, but also at the individual homeowner and business scale, where individual appliances are being managed remotely or automatically based on energy supply and pricing and things like that, that changes the dynamic. And then if you superimpose data over wire, you know, for the Internet of Things being something that is managed through the electrical source wiring scheme or even wirelessly. And we've got a formula for a transformative thing that's happening over the next several decades, where I always like to say the energy system that has remained pretty stable for the last 100 years is going to transform the same way that the communication system transformed in the 1990s and the early 2000s, with the movement from plain old telephone to the internet, to wireless, to data streaming, and all these other kinds of things that we now take for granted, but are really only a couple of decades old. And so it's exciting. It's an exciting time. It's going to be a place where a lot of people make a lot of money and a lot of businesses go under because they do not adapt to the new playing field. So
one of the things that appears to me to be on the edge, and it's not electrochemical storage, but it's thermal storage. And I think that the Regulatory Assistance Project did the Teaching the Duck to Fly version 2. And I think some of their concepts in terms of batching electric water heaters and batching other types of things. And one of the big pushes in with this Inflation Reduction Act is in heat pumps. And I think there's great possibility in storing both cold and heat in perhaps tanks of water. Water is far cheaper than lithium, far cheaper than any of the chemical processes. And it could be used in the place of, say, ice bears or one of the other things. It doesn't work on a utility scale simply because district heating in the United States has never been a thing. It is in Europe, but not here. But on a local level, it could be batched into a virtual power plant in the same way that electrochemical batteries are.
yeah, one thing, well, your comment there, Bill, just made me think. Tony, you're talking about virtual power plants, but what about an industry that evolves of combined curtailment management? You know, as these systems get built out, is there going to be industries developing that when there is no load demand, yet there is supply of renewable energy, can we divert that energy to essentially a load dump that is doing things like manufacturing liquid hydrogen or manufacturing hydrogen jet fuel or storing thermal capacity or whatever, that's just an unlimited load dump that is being amalgamated through some sort of centralized source, redirected so that it can be used when power is available and not used when power is not available. That'll be an interesting business model, I suspect, because like every other thing that happens, this is a new technology, renewable is, we're going to overshoot the mark. Everybody's going to go rushing out there to install solar, every business, every utility, every homeowner, and we're going to overshoot demand. And now we got to figure out, well, what do we do with this? I mean, do we just leave these wind fields not spinning? Do we just let the solar sit there unused? So it may be a short-term thing, but it's going to be a thing. at some point.
I think the other interesting thing that I'm running into on an almost daily basis is how messy and chaotic this energy transition is.
Yeah.
Because there's a huge school of thought that says we need to make the centrally managed way of doing things, like kind of the grid style, central energy production, and then massive distribution. That's falling apart. There's been deferred maintenance on that for about 50 years. And that's getting worse, right? Worse in both of, very badly, both in terms of number of blackouts and brownouts, economic damage due to blackouts, right? And obviously, if all of those things weren't enough, we are looking at things pretty closely on, all right, well, as electrification takes off and you tether transportation to a fragile and failing grid system, what the hell is going to happen then, right?
Right.
So one school of, and it's really like this philosophical difference. One is like, oh shit, how do we fix this centrally managed energy generation and distribution system? And then the other school of thought, and this is one that I subscribe to, and Jay, you do as well. I think the telecommunication example is a phenomenal parallel. It's no, the solution for energy security and resiliency. Forget sustainability for a second. Energy security and resiliency is a bunch of decentralized nodes. And so, in my mind, what makes the most sense is you shorten the distance from the point at which energy is generated to the point at which it's consumed, and you can't really get any shorter than you generate it on your roof and use it, right? So, but both of these things are happening at the same time. There's obviously a lot of entrenched interests on the centrally managed grid style, and there's a bunch of folks who want to do the more decentralized, and both of these things are kind of happening at once, so it creates this wildly exciting and chaotic time to live, because it's not like some god or arbiter king is picking one. Both people are kind of fighting for the survival. I talked to a kind of in my never-ending quest to figure out why utilities suck and why they have their head up their ass. I talked to a couple former utility executives, and they actually point out something very interesting. So one of the reasons that utilities are hostile against solar in particular, they've got a pretty crappy job, which is they must keep the lights on 24/7, always without fail. And when you talk about intermittency of renewable energy, that's like an enemy of that. The real interesting problem from both our energy security and from a access or equality perspective, that these guys pointed out to me is, so you're wealthy, you throw solar on your roof, very first early adopters, and you're using it on the net metered situation, which is essentially you kind of getting out of paying for the grid distribution to allow you to do that. And so what that does is it raises slightly, in the early days, it raises the cost on everyone else who doesn't have solar to make sure that you have the ability to distribute your electrons on the grid system. Well, then more people are then incentivized as the cost of it goes up to put on solar, which makes the price or the pool of people who are actually paying for the distribution shrink. That continues to happen until you're in this very odd scenario where you've got the folks who can afford to go solar, and the folks who can't are paying a ridiculous price to maintain the grid infrastructure for everybody else, right? And then so that's a breaking point that we're not obviously there yet, but that's where a lot of these executives kind of pointed out, like, hey, and then there's like not great answers. I'm here to tell you, like, this is not a solved thing. There's not some cigar smoke-filled room in DC or anywhere that have this figured out. But one of the things that they're concerned is like, as more people opt out, whether that's completely off grid or whether that's just a net metered situation and they're just like not paying hardly anything to maintain the distribution of electrons, that price goes up on all of the other poor suckers who don't have solar. So they're incentivized to then jump on as fast as they possibly can to get into the solar game, to not be left behind and pay for everybody else. Yeah. So that's like a really interesting thing that's happening right now.
I think
Isn't that what happened in Germany?
Oh, no, Germany is a case where I know it's always thrown out there.
They subsidize it, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And of course, it was through feed-in tariffs. And that's a European model where You know, that works well in these countries where people are used to those kind of models. Here, I think we would, well, works well
Yeah.
enough to work.
The people I know are the ones Tony was talking about who are still paying for it. They didn't think
Yeah,
it
yeah,
worked as
yeah.
well. That's why I stopped it.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I would argue is the problems the utilities are facing here, and what you're saying there, Tony, is absolutely correct. Although I think they were crying wolf a lot too soon, which tended to negate their argument today when it really becomes a thing. They were yelling it's a thing when it was penetration was 0.00001% or whatever.
Yes.
And it was
Yes.
coming on to the grid when they needed it most. And so it was helping them. But anyway, they continue to view themselves as an energy distribution system. And as long as they do that, they are doomed to fail because of changes in technology. They have to give me some better reason to connect than just the fact that I get energy from them, because I can do that myself and I can do it for myself cheaper. So they need to give me free Disney Plus for signing up. You know, I mean, they need to give me something, right? They got to create themselves as an entertainment system or a security for your home system, or, you know, lots of reasons, lots of benefits I can get from connecting to the grid. You've got a centralized system. We see the benefits of that with the internet. You know, I can use a laptop computer without the internet and it works just fine. But there are services I cannot self-generate, such as, you know, entertainment and communication and things like that. They need to transition themselves. They need to transform themselves from an energy distribution system to a intelligent electronic distribution network, and provide me with services I can't get anywhere else. Motivate me to sign up, because power, shoot, I can get that for myself. You know, and that's the thing that these people are. That's why AEP and those kind of companies will not be the successful utilities of the future, but the new emerging Silicon Valley type will be the utility of the future.
Are they allowed to do that, Jay? They're a regulated industry.
Yeah,
I just
but
raised the question. I don't know.
Yeah, no, most of these companies, Amazon, Walmart, Google, Facebook,
They're
those have,
getting into it.
yeah, they have all been approved by the federal government as utilities. So they're moving in that direction. Their first step has been to say, I'm going to take the energy I'm generating through my installed and use it myself. But they're just getting up to the point where they're reaching 100% saturation. And now they're going to go beyond that and say, how do I sell that to somebody else? And that will be an interesting transition mode for the utility.
There's a
Bill, you had
question-
something? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a question of timing. In the Midwest and the West, probably wind is most completely what's largely a nighttime and winter phenomenon, as opposed to a summer and peak load phenomenon. So wind, and Mix Grillo a long time ago said that small wind takes about as much wear in 4 months as a car does in 100,000 miles.
Yeah, yeah.
And it does. I've watched small turbines go up and then come back down over and over and over. They just don't last. So that is necessarily a base load wind farm operation. Solar, on the other hand, is a peak load rooftop situation that makes the most sense. So they're complementary, but we're not going to get away from the grid. The grid is going to be a distribution process from baseload wind. And so I think that we're looking at a time where the utilities are recognizing this. And we had Duke Energy, and I know Evergy is doing the same thing. They're gold plating their distribution system to keep the rate base up.
Yeah. Well,
it will be a centralized system for quite a long time in the future.
Well, the incentives for utilities has always been to build infrastructure. I mean, that's where they make their profits. And that's something that's got to change. I mean, the whole regulatory system, I mean, as Tony was pointing out, everything is in flux. And we can all sit here and I'm the worst at it, prognosticate about what's going to happen, and then be so, 180 degrees wrong because some technology comes along or some law passes. So, but it'll be interesting. It'll be a time of opportunity. That's
Well,
for
there were
sure.
a couple of other things that Tony commented about. And in terms of circling the drain model for the utilities, we had a rate study for the electricity rate study done by AECOM 2 years ago. And it came to the conclusion that solar producers, rooftop distributed solar people, are generating more value to the grid than they're taking from it. So, the whole paradigm that we are taking from the utility is not correct in most at least of the western part of the country. It may be the fact that in New England and further, in the northern portion of the country, that we do, but not in this part of the country.
Well, California had the infamous duck curve, and I think
Right.
that's where it hits that point where, yes, for a long time, basically you're pushing down peak load in the middle of the afternoon because that's when excess solar is being generated. If that continues, the curve gets lower and lower until there is the possibility of overproduction in the middle of the afternoon because customers are using less, but they're also pumping more onto the grid. We're not close to there yet, but we're approaching it, and especially in some places of high market saturation.
And that's
So it's
where
a
storage
concern.
comes in.
Yeah, storage is the game changer here because then solar, wind, they can become base load, if we have enough storage. So the question is, will we invest enough in storage if we can use virtual utilities by storing in the automobiles, the electric vehicles? That's a shortcut for sure. Will utilities go out there and put in these huge storage facilities? Do they need to? I don't know. I was seeing some study that showed that experts are pretty much wrong about every future trend that has ever been. And I guess we're as much a group of experts here as so we're probably more wrong than any other group of people. And if you just randomly ask people on the sidewalk, they'd be righter than us, but that'll be interesting. Well, let me get into the solar energy report. I'm going to share the screen here. If you want to get this report, it just came out this week. If we, this is the Energy Sage report. I'm trying to see if I can go to full screen. I'll just scroll down. All right, so if you're familiar with this Energy Sage, are you guys seeing the report here on the screen? Yeah, it comes out every 6 months from Energy Save. The main takeaways that they're coming from here is that prices increased in the first half of this year. We were kind of aware of that, but they increased by about 3.5%, up from a low of I think it was I didn't write that down. Anyway, they're up to 277 per watt as the mean for per watt installed. Storage increased and consolidation of the market increased. So those were kind of the main takeaways, but we'll go to what this means individually. If this is the median price of solar, and this is residential solar, I should point out. This is not commercial or utility scale solar. And they get these by interviewing hundreds of installers across the country. So I think it's pretty good data. It's as good as we have. So they're showing that the median's 277, and it varies. It did hit a low of 267 the beginning of last year, and then it increased slightly last year, but now it's up 3.5%, down about 27% over the last 8 years. So that's significant. But I think everybody would agree this is due to supply chain issues and the whole thing from Southeast Asia with the tariff uncertainty. that was going on there. So we may see that work itself through the system. Also showing that there's quite a range of distribution and prices from $1.75 a watt all the way up to $4.75 a watt. So it'd be nice to get $4.75 a watt for installing these systems, but then you'd be one of those shyster salespeople probably. All right, storage pricing trends. This is something I mentioned just a minute ago. This is price per kilowatt hour of storage. And the price has remained stable over the last year, but it's basically $1,290 per kilowatt hour retail for install. You're shaking your head, Tony, like you don't believe it, or that's embarrassing that they're marketing.
It's embarrassing, right? Because I mean, I talked to CATL, right? I went to the mothership, and to your point, I mean, we're talking sub $200 a kilowatt hour from the source, right? And some of these other energy storage companies that I've talked to domestically, even kind of alternative chemistries to lithium ion, are targeting around $200 from the source, $200 a kilowatt hour. So Tom, Dick, and Harry, when they go to put it in their house, are paying $1,300. That's a pretty nice margin.
Yeah. Well, and the most installed energy storage system out there is Enphase, which is also the most expensive per kilowatt hour.
Really? I would have said it
yes.
was a Powerwall, hands down.
No, by a large margin, it's Enphase. 45% for Enphase, about 20% for Tesla. So, and that makes sense to me, being a microinverter owner. These are people retrofitting their microinverters. And Enphase, if you go with Enphase, your only option for storage is Enphase. It's a proprietary type system. So so that's what you're going to get. So yeah, makes sense.
So Jay, how does that work? So photon hits solar panel, DC, goes to the microinverter on the back of the panel, flips to AC. That AC gets run to a battery and then flipped back to DC. And then when you want to use that battery, you flip it back to AC?
Yes. Yes, welcome to the world of AC coupled systems. Now that's the same, it works that way with the Tesla Powerwall. A Tesla Powerwall is an AC system, but with the Enphase batteries, they do incorporate microinverters within the battery as well. So not only does it have an AC to DC charging unit within it, but then it has microinverters that take that DC power and convert it to AC to service the loads. So, when we talk about the price per battery, I'm going to assume that incorporates those inverters in that price because they come as a unit. You can't buy an Enphase battery without the microinverters incorporated within the unit. Plus, any lithium ion is going to have some electronic components in it for managing, the charging and discharging of that battery. So it's not just like an old battery you stick in your car. These things are systems as opposed to just a battery. Let's see, the storage market. Yeah, which are the ones that dominate? Well, this slide right here is just showing you Enphase, the blue one right here, is right about 45% of the storage market capacity, followed by Tesla, which is right at around 20%. Then we get up into LG Chem, which is around 10%, it looks like. Generac, about another 10%. So Generac is really coming on strong here. They're doing a lot of marketing about their systems. And then SolarEdge up here, about 8%. Although, as I mentioned before, I think the SolarEdge battery is just LG Chem with another name on it. So my guess is we could combine those two and say it's like 18% of the marketplace, just with two different names. So that's a bit of a consolidation, but you can see, well, if anything, well, they say it's consolidation, but we're really going from 3 dominant players to 5 or 4, if we count SolarEdge as LG Chem. So then we talk about which is the, these are the most expensive. Yeah, let me jump off of that. Customer preferences. Why are they going on storage? I thought this was an interesting change. The major change here is if you look at the purple line here, last year The main reason for going with storage was grid backup, 64%. That dropped to 33%. So pricing models, basically self-supply, because they're not paying me anything if I ship it back to them, and time of day pricing. So the economics now are becoming the major reason people are going to storage versus an unreliable grid. You know, I'd say it went from 2/3 because the grid's unreliable to 1/3, and 1/3 who said it makes economic sense to now 2/3. So I think this is a reaction to utilities changing a lot of their net metering laws and our requirements and changing their pricing models. And people are just saying, hey, if you're going to do that to me, I'm going to go self-storage. I'm going to go self-consumption, because who needs you, you know? So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Solar price distribution, they get into a lot of things. If you want a copy of this report, if you want to send me an email, I can send it, but you can just go to energysage.com, and the report is right there on their homepage. That would be an easier way, energysage.com. So California, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona are the 5 big installer states at the moment. They're the top 5. And 3 out of the 5 are below the median. California, well, Arizona is the cheapest. Arizona is the cheapest install state at $225 per kilowatt hour. Minnesota is the highest at $3.64 per kilowatt hour. Some of that is probably a relationship to how much sunlight is available. That's going to factor in, because you're going to have to stick more panels in to get the same amount of energy. So that's going to be a minor bit, but it's probably also a factor of how big the systems are that are going in and how many people are out there competing for the dollars. So that's always an issue. Here's some others. Georgia's high. Georgia's pretty expensive. And Massachusetts, Virginia. Surprised Bob isn't saying Illinois. Illinois is always high. So up in Chicagoland. Yeah, I was going to skip over some of that about sizes, cost difference. So they have a lot of information here about distributions nationwide if you want to see where your state falls in there. Solar panel market share. The big one is REC. REC represents, looks like about, oh, I thought I wrote that down, but no, well, looks like it's about 20%, a little over 20%. The next one is Panasonic. Panasonic is losing market share. REC is gaining. Then, of course, Q-Cells. Q-Cells jumped up a bit, representing maybe about 10% or so. Oh yeah, here I estimated REC's 25%, Panasonic about 15, Q-Cell about 15, Silfab is about 10%, and Aptos. I had never heard of Aptos Solar. That's a new one for me, but they represent about 10%. So maybe they're branded under something else. I don't know, you know. And then it's kind of the rest of the market field all over the place. And then we look at inverters, Enphase, 55% of the market for Enphase. Solar Edge is about 30% of the market. So between those two, about 85% of the residential marketplace between Solar Edge. But if you look at that chart on the right, you are seeing that these two, Solar Edge and Enphase, are starting to decline just a bit. In fact, they've lost about 4% of their combined market share, and that's been picked up by SunPower and Generac, who gained about 4%. And am I right in, I was looking at it because SunPower, was that Fronius before? Did they buy up Fronius and now it's being marketed as, I think it's marketed as Fronius SunPower, but might be wrong. But anyway, so those are going to be string inverters. So in the world of residential, it's pretty much going to be N phase if you want microinverters, although we're starting to see Generac get into that. We're seeing AP systems involved in that. And then if you want power optimizers, it's going to be Solar Edge. And then if you want a string inverter, it's probably going to be a SunPower or a Generac string inverter. Sunny Boy, I know I've seen a lot of Sunny Boy out there as well, but we'll see. So those are the markets there and how they're evolving. Some of the equipment, the size, that's just showing that size matters, right? That the bigger the system, the cheaper the per watt is going to be. How many different brands people are offering, which ones they offer, how it compares, preferences by state, financing options. These are all in the report if you're so inclined. Price dispersion over the mean, and then some marketing stuff from Energy Sage. It did say in there that the average size of a solar array residential is 10.2 kilowatt hours, or kilowatts, sorry, not kilowatt hours. And that the smallest is in California, 8 kilowatts. The largest on average is in Arkansas with 14.6. So yeah, those are some pretty hefty on average. So Arkansas, I guess in Arkansas, it's like go big or go home, right? So that should be the Razorbacks motto. All right, so any comments on the state of the industry there?
Tony, I have some projects in Trinidad here on EV with some pretty big plans. So I'll shoot you an email, right? I need to get some input on you on that.
Yeah, man. Let me know. We can schedule a Zoom. You've got my email.
Yeah.
Just opening this up to Jay and really the rest of the group. I don't like being too philosophical on strategy for a product, but for me and for my team, DC coupled systems make a lot more sense to us than AC coupled systems. Understanding that the market for probably starting with microinverters and the fact that most systems are just net metered, that's the easiest way of doing things, which it has to end up in AC anyway, so just do AC. If we believe that the future looks like solar, DC, stationary storage, DC, and electric mobility, DC, for us, it's like, let's keep things on the DC side as much as possible. Solar right to a battery that's either stationary, solar right to a car for a charge, car to car, car to battery, battery to car, everything stays on the DC side and only flip to AC when you have to do it. Interested in kind of Jay, your thoughts on that and kind of like a revenge of Edison, if you will.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this was an OG idea that lost out to AC. I think one of the most, and this is hyper nerdy observation, but one of the biggest ironies now is the greatest energy company of our time, Tesla, is all DC, right? It's solar DC, battery DC, electric vehicles DC, and their name is taken after the guy who fought the AC battle against Edison and or in Westinghouse with Westinghouse and won. Interested to know your thoughts on that. Is like, because I'm not obviously interested in something that is technically or academically true and then getting driven off a cliff.
Right.
Right.
I think you're right in that. I mean, again, when I teach and I'm philosophizing about it or whatever, I'll typically say that DC coupled systems make sense at the initial installation, and that AC coupled is usually a retrofit kind of thing where you're coming in, you've already got a system, and now I want battery storage, so it is your only option.
Got it.
Although product may change some of that because, of course, N phase is coming out, so it depends on whether they can provide alternatives like an AC coupled solution at a pricing point that is comparable to a DC. From a logical standpoint, it doesn't make any sense. You're doing 3 different conversion cycles, but the efficiency of these conversions is so high anymore that the losses are 2% each time you go through a conversion. So that's not That's not a huge issue. And I'll get you in a second, Devin. But then the other thing that I would say about automobile charging, which perfectly makes sense, keeping it DC, except for vehicle to load applications. And I don't know how you do that without incorporating an inverter in the vehicle. You know, so I'm thinking of the Ford Lightning, for example, that's marketing itself as I'm going to take this out on the road and I'm going to run the work site. You know, it basically becomes a big generator. That's attractive. That's appealing. And if you don't do the inversion within the vehicle, you lose that option. So that's kind of where my head's on that. Devin, did you have something to add there?
Well, listening to the argument on DC versus AC couple, right? You all in the states have grid tie systems, which is all a main type of configuration. In Trinidad, we are the opposite because our laws don't allow grid tie. We have to make a special application for it. It's really off grid. So in my case, I get a lot of customers, well, starting to get customers now, asking about putting a system down that is off grid, but decided now that it can't go grid tie when it lowers. So I always have to look at AC coupling. Maybe that might be something. Where towards on it?
Yeah, well, there you're in a transition phase, I think, you know. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe the United States is going to find ourselves in a similar situation. You know, if the grid becomes, it has not been well maintained. If we go into a deregulation mode, I mean, who's going to build the grid of the future, or will everything be localized? You know, well, you know, I don't know. The Biden administration, of course, just funneled a lot of money into upgrading the transmission system, which is the long haul. And to Tony's point, the transmission system is becoming DC dominated. You know, as we move between facilities, they like to transition to DC because that's like the O positive of electricity. You know, you don't have to worry about harmonic distortions and things like that.
Yes.
So that may, you know, embolden your decision, make you look a lot smarter, you know, 100 years from now when we're talking about Tesla, Edison, and Frisson, you know, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, to Devin's point, you know, what we found is particularly in outside the United States, in more kind of frontier markets, it's a hell of a lot easier to do kind of microgrid, nanogrid, DC based, the smarter, actually deploy a smarter solution where you don't have maybe reliable or the default reliable AC grid connection or any grid connection at all. And so that's something that the team and I are pretty excited about, you know, helping energy transition in other parts of the world that don't look like kind of a centrally managed kind of grid-based system, but also doing what we can here to make things make a little bit more sense.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead, Devin, and then I'm gonna cut you off.
Yeah, what's going on in Trinidad is really about a year ago, the government in our country starting to look at grid tie systems. So they're now doing over legislation and laws to allow grid connection to take place. We can't predict yet, it might take place this year, next year. So customers now who have been traditionally looking at it, they say, okay, well, put a system for me might be a 5 kilowatt or 10 kilowatt of grid system, but they don't want to pay the extra cost to transition the grid tie later on. So it's more like putting a design proposal now that if when the government does allow grid tie, the transition, the option for the customers can be there one time.
Yeah, email me, we can help with that.
Yeah, all right.
Okay. All right, well, we're gonna have to cut it off right there. We're right at the hour. So thanks, everybody. Good discussion. We'll see you all next week. All right.
Thanks, Jay.
Bye-bye.